Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 35 team selection, but just before we start with Game Week 35, let's just go through Game Week 34, which was hilariously catastrophic for me for many reasons. Ironically, of course, the team selection that I debuted would have probably performed much, much worse because I wouldn't have gone for Eze, and I'd be staring at possibly the worst FPL team of all time in one of the greatest game weeks of all time. I've seen people hit 200 points naturally, without chips being used. I've seen people free hit, just the consistent, I guess, average score would be around your 130, 140, 150 range. Congratulations to all you free hitters. The safety score this week was 114. I got 77. So just a little bit of point to reflect. 400% red arrow as well secured. That's a lifetime achievement unlocked for myself. And I feel a little bit hard done by, and I'll talk about it here. Haaland, of course, we didn't get the news pre-deadline that he was out. I did mention in the team selection that if Haaland was out, I might even be, going for the double hit in terms of Mateta and Isak. Didn't get the chance to do so because I didn't think that Haaland, would have missed the Brighton game. Didn't seem like he was that injured really, so I didn't take that chance. Apparently the news now is that Haaland just has missed training this week because he might have been ill. Not exactly sure whether that's true or not, but you just have to take that on the chin. Palmer being out, additional pain. Gusto being out, probably a good thing because I probably would have had a -1 from Gusto, but we got Pau Torres as an auto sub in the end. He was ahead of Gusto anyway, so it's not like it would have changed anything. Neto, of course, Bournemouth keep a clean sheet, a pretty interesting clean sheet, I might add. Maybe a little bit undeserved because I think the Hwang goal was very legitimate, and Neto unfortunately was benched for that game, so Travers came in. Maybe you could argue that Neto would have lost the clean sheet anyways, but it is what it is. The rest of the defense was actually the one defining aspect of the week that was actually nice. Although actually, you're thinking about it, Ben White, of course, completely outscored my defense, or at least my Arsenal defense, so that's that. And then Guardiola, a pretty average week when you consider that players like Branthwaite, Tarkowski all had amazing game weeks. Even Zabani, for example, a bit fortunate to keep the clean sheet last night, but fairly deserved for owners. In the midfield, I actually ended up deciding to go for Eze, and I also went for Isak on attack. And part of Isak is the idea that I have to manage my team going forwards, heading towards Game Week 35, managing the bench boost in Game Week 37, since I don't have a wild card. And just looking forward, I kind of liked Isak as a half in, half out measure. Now, it goes back to the point of Newcastle being really poor away from home. That was a really, really poor performance. Actually, when you look at Crystal Palace's expected goals, it wasn't like the case that Newcastle completely capitulated and Crystal Palace were completely dominant like they were versus West Ham. I think it was more of a case where, great shots really taken, poor keeping from Dubravka as well. You can put it down to that. But yeah, of course, the Newcastle attack was completely blunt, and potentially that was an error on my part, right? Not trying to seek the upside within the short term, but also knowing that I had to manage the medium to long term with my team. And sometimes that doesn't work out so well. I also think that Mateta's 29 points might be the most insane 29 points from a player really of his quality, I suppose, having seen him all season, knowing his stats, knowing how good Crystal Palace have been on offense, just seeing that performance in a double game week and going against that, going against Pickford, for example, your Havertz's and Odegaard's, credit to everyone who went for a free hit. Obviously, when I went for Game Week 26 wildcard, I didn't initially think to go for free at 34. But as it turns out, of course, free at 29 was awful because we all know that everyone just didn't perform. Everyone blanked effectively. This was the complete opposite. Everyone scored. Even, for example, the people who played one fixture, like your Jotas of the world, 1 goal, 1 assist within that one game. Your Elise's first game gets in there, gets 1 goal, 1 assist as well. It is what it is. I think in terms of FPL, you just have to move on from times like this, and I have to take it on a chin. As I said, lifetime achievement to get a -400% red arrow, and we just have to say goodbye. And I'm pretty upset really of Liverpool. I think that's the main takeaway here for Game Week 34. They look awful, and most importantly, Salah looks awful as well. Now, West Ham, of course, is the game of choice here for Liverpool in Game Week 35, and I think a lot of people, might be advised to really keep someone like Salah within this game week. I think if he starts, you're getting to face, of course, a bottom 3, bottom 4 team. However, of course, it is away from home, but it's still such a great chance for Liverpool. And, what better than, for example, to overcome a whole week or even a month's worth of really poor results for Liverpool than to have the pressure off of them because, of course, technically they're out of the title race and they can absolutely destroy a West Ham team who are, quote unquote, on the beach. So that's very probable. But I just feel like I have so much more confidence right now in the way Arsenal are playing, the way City are playing, that I just can't see myself justifying keeping Luis Diaz and Salah, particularly on a double game week where I've got the opportunity to sort of maximize a little bit of upside in different positions and also invest into other teams. So because I'm generally so down on Liverpool, I think I'm going to go a little bit aggressive this week. Try to set up my bench boost as if almost I'm doing a mini wild card and taking a big fat hit here and taking it on the chin. Expecting another red arrow. I'll probably fall out of the top 10k. The plan, of course, is still to get top 10k at the end of the season. We have the bench boost to probably make a little bit of a small surge back in there. But yeah, this week is probably going to be another week where I think I'll struggle because I'm going to take these hits to make sure my bench boost is strong and make sure that I am investing into the teams that have either more fixtures towards the end of the season or ultimately are playing incredibly, like, for example, an Arsenal and a City, and a team that I'd be much more confident in sort of putting my faith towards. So for Game Week 35, I'm going to tell you right now, I will be taking a big fat -12. Now, don't do this at home, I suppose, but ultimately, this is a week for me, as I said, to set up the bench boost. So I see that this as an opportunity with Neto, for example, losing starting appearances. He would have been the goalkeeper that I would have started this week for sure versus a completely blunt-edged Brighton team. Now, Brighton actually had some chances versus Man City, most of them created by João Pedro. I think that Bournemouth will potentially lose their clean sheet. I don't even know if Neto's going to play. And I don't really like Flecken away versus Everton. Everton at home are definitely a different beast, and I'm not going to take the chances here of Flecken. I'm going to take a -4 here for Vicario. So he's technically my first -4. Obviously, there's going to be a free transfer, and I'll tell you about that when I go into the midfield position. In defense, though, I'll just simply be fielding Saliba, Guardiola, and Gabriel. Unfortunately, we got the really, really bad news, at least for people, within my position. Of course, some people wildcarding don't care about this. If you're on a wildcard, you can just go for Petrovic within your Chelsea players. I think it's extremely hard right now to choose between your Disasi's of the world, your Thiago Silva's of the world. Too much rotation, Chalobah as well. So I really wouldn't take the chances with Chelsea here. And of course, I'll just have to keep Gusto on my bench. So instead, I'm going to be playing Saliba, Guardiola, and Gabriel. And then I have Pau Torres, who has Chelsea at home. A good fixture, of course, but I'm just much less confident in the Aston Villa defense compared to this Arsenal defense, who have just been stellar across the board, really. So going with Saliba and Gabriel here and Guardiola, I do think that Guardiola will play the next match. I don't know whether that's the case or not. Ake has played 2 games in a row now. Guardiola also played 90 minutes, whereas you saw some players like your Walkers of the world get subbed off a little bit earlier to get a little bit of rest, which is fine. The same went for Rodri too for Man City. I do think Guardiola, of course, got rested within the FA Cup match, which is something that I mentioned, and I think I'd be pretty confident that he plays the next match. Of course, worst case scenario, I've got Pau Torres off the bench. Part of the reason why I haven't taken any hits to go for any defenders, like, for example, Pedro Porro and Trippier, is because we don't have news on Trippier yet, and I still think that it's very unlikely that he'll start, coming back from such a long injury as well. Maybe his minutes will not be guaranteed either, so I just don't think that there's a chance that I'm going to get Trippier this week, although it would be so nice to have Trippier versus Sheffield United at home. Schär as well would be a great option, but I still think, for example, when you have the option of choosing between Schär and Dan Burn, if you're not on the wild card, I think it's so much easier to go Dan Burn, knowing that maybe you have some additional cash in the bank, and whenever a situation props up where you can actually use more cash in the bank, you can actually just use that then. So that was my decision making with regards to Newcastle. As far as Pedro Porro as well, he's back in training, but I really just have to say that the fixtures do not flatter Tottenham at all. And I've already gone for Vicario, and I don't really want to overinvest into Tottenham for now, because I think that the one benefit that I always talk about with these goalkeepers who face really tough fixtures, like in Arsenal, for example, or even Chelsea, who have shown to be a really competent attacking team, is that ultimately, as the goalkeeper, you do benefit a lot more from games where you're getting absolutely blown out of the water, or you have to make a lot of saves. So, for example, a team like City, a team like Arsenal will put a lot of pressure on Vicario, I imagine, and he'll be able to make saves. So a good example is just this Chelsea absolute battering where, Petrovic comes out of this game with 2 points. Most of the Chelsea defenders come out of that game with -1 points or 0 points. So for me, the hit should still be worth it, even though the Arsenal game is extremely tough. But I think you have to look at it where when you go for Pedro Porro with an Arsenal game, there's not that sort of switch where you can go for and get save points. Pedro Porro just loses his clean sheet. On the flip side, Vicario could very well keep a clean sheet, but also, expecting that he does, because it's very normal to lose your clean sheet versus Arsenal nowadays, he can make some save points as well. So that was something that I was thinking about in terms of going for the hit for Vicario. And of course, he's going to set up the bench boost in 37. Not to mention as well, they closed the season out with Game Week 38, a really good fixture versus Sheffield United. So just thinking about, for example, even Game Week 38, that's always a week where you have to make a lot of additional transfers. I kind of like the security that Vicario provides. And that's it for the defense. As far as the midfield for this week, hits were taken and hits galore. So Foden is back in my team after completely embarrassing me since Game Week 26. Really, I have to sort of hold the white flag versus Phil Foden here. He's been an incredible player, shot some amazing goals outside the box, really, that have really frustrated me as a non-manager and non-owner, really. But, hats off to him. He's just an incredible player. Got rested as well versus Brighton, so looks pretty fresh for this Nottingham Forest fixture. Nottingham Forest, of course, are a much better team defensively compared to West Ham. So, for example, when I go out of Luis Diaz for Foden here, it's going to look a little bit silly in context, but I think we have to say that there's just a huge gulf between the way City are operating as a team right now, even though historically for the whole of the season, Liverpool have been the best offense. I just really can't back the idea right now that Luis Diaz out and Salah out aren't the right ideas. So I've gone for Foden in, Son in. So obviously Son, I would technically say is going to be my free transfer. Salah for Son, that is. And then of course with the additional money in the bank, I can go Luis Diaz to Foden. The additional money in the bank also gave me the option to go for Vicario, because of course, if you remember from some of my previous videos, I was on 0.0 in the bank. I kept Eze here over Luis Diaz for the purposes of this game week, because I think that when you look back to, for example, the starting lineup before the Everton game, it was actually rumored that Luis Diaz was out of the lineup and that he was benched and that Gakpo was going to start ahead of him. Now, I think obviously Diaz was one of the few players within that Liverpool front line, given that they were so limited by Gakpo and the birth of his child on that specific day, unfortunately, which kept him out of the lineup, that maybe Luis Diaz starts again versus West Ham and maybe he'll play rather well again. But Salah, Luis Diaz, and Darwin just don't flatter me. I do think Luis Diaz can still be an early substitution. It's something that we've seen lately. He can also be on the bench. Why take that chance when I've also got Eze, who obviously has a worse fixture when it comes to Fulham, but is also a potential penalty taker and someone that I'm pretty comfortable having just as a first bench option. The reason why a first bench option is so important this week and why I'm spending so much time to talk about it is because we know that Haaland is very unlikely to be someone who could start this weekend. At least that's my thought, right? He hasn't played maybe for around 2 weeks. You're also looking at someone like Haaland where he hasn't been in training at all. So he's not been in training, which is something that's quite important for, Man City and Pep Guardiola. Maybe he doesn't start this match for Nottingham Forest. Maybe it makes more sense that he starts in Gaming 36 instead. So I'd like to take this opportunity to at least have someone very useful as a first bench option. And of course, if we get news that Haaland might not start the game, I'll just move Eze towards my starting lineup and I'll be comfortable with that at the end of the day. It's the best that I can do for now. With Saka, of course, it was another decision as well. When you look at, for example, having your Liverpool and Arsenal players within your team, I just think that I'm so much more confident in this Arsenal team going forwards. I'm also more confident in the minutes that Saka will get compared to someone like Salah. So, 2 penalty takers, having to make a decision between the two of them. Am I more confident in this Arsenal team? Generally speaking, yes. Of course, as I said, Salah has a great fixture this week. West Ham away. A lot of people should be considering to keep him. But I'm going to take the chance here, of course, since I went out of Son last week, to go back into Son through Salah. And I rather, for example, Salah be my cash cow than Saka. So that's also given me the chance, as I said, to go into the Fodens of the world and the Vicarios of the world. And I kind of like just keeping Saka now. I just feel like I've got more faith in him overall, even though, of course, Salah is, quote unquote, the better player, historically at least, until you've seen him recently, I suppose. As far as the forward positions, we're going to line up with Isak, Jackson, and Haaland. Now, Isak, Jackson, and Haaland, once again, you'll probably spot that I didn't own one of these players last week, and it was actually Jackson, right? So I went into Isak ultimately last week, and Jackson was the final hit here. So a -12 in total for Vicario, Foden, Son, and Jackson. 3 doublers and 1 Phil Foden, who outscored a couple of doublers today, I suppose, in Game Week 34, in the final fixture of the game week. The reason why I've done that is simply because Solanke actually has a great fixture versus Brighton. And when you look at Brighton, they looked absolutely awful versus Man City. And in general, some of the defensive performances from Brighton have been really poor. And I think Solanke's going to have great chances. I'm sure Solanke can score too. One thing I'll mention about Jackson, though, is, a lot of people are going to laugh here that I'm going for Jackson for a hit. And I think, that's fine. But ultimately, he just has 5 fixtures in 3 game weeks. He is someone who still gets very consistent chances for Chelsea. There might be a world where Jackson could be on penalties as well if Palmer is out, so that's something to think about. Palmer, of course, I didn't even mention in terms of my midfield team, but of course, he's sitting there. Just someone that we don't really know about, and I'll talk about captaincy later because, of course, we have some, unfortunately, some poor news about Palmer as well, not to mention just Gusto. So Jackson for me is someone who's going to play 90 minutes going forwards, and Kunku could very well come back before the end of the season. But I still think that the short term, when you look at, for example, a fixture like Tottenham at home, of course it looks bad on paper when you say Aston Villa and Tottenham for Chelsea. But I do think that these fixtures are amazing to attack from a Chelsea perspective, because next week you also have West Ham at home. So what we know about West Ham at home is that it's a brilliant fixture, and I won't have anyone tell me otherwise after I've learnt my lesson, I suppose, this week, not going for Mateta. But yeah, Jackson has that opportunity, I suppose, to play 3 brilliant fixtures. Aston Villa, of course, is a little bit of a mediocre fixture, let's be honest. But you can see Jackson, of course, creating problems for a lot of top offenses. Now, he creates problems, but he doesn't really score them. So maybe that's the problem with Jackson. But I still think that with the amount of chances he has, you just have to go back to the course of the season where he still had a relatively good campaign, right? He scored a sufficient amount of goals. He's gotten a lot of yellow cards too, and made some questionable fouls, but he still is someone who can get towards assists and goals. And so ultimately, as I said, with the additional fixtures, with the appearance points sort of sandwiched in there, I do think that the hit is worthwhile, and that's why I've gone for Jackson this week. And that's it, really. West Ham at home, something that I'm also really looking forward to sort of maximizing this week, or Game Week 36 rather. And that's it really for the team selection. But the captaincy, of course, this week is a question mark. So Son is probably the default and the safest option. He has the worst fixtures, I would say, in terms of, when you're looking at a double game week, can it get worse, really? Probably not, to be honest, right? Arsenal away from home are still a stellar defense, no matter what. And Chelsea away, probably going to be a tougher fixture than, let's say, if Tottenham were playing at home. Now, of course, the last time Tottenham played at home versus Chelsea absolutely ripped them apart. But that's not to say that the game's going to go the same way. Of course, the red cards had a huge ramification on the way that Tottenham played. I still think that Son is probably the most stable option this week when it comes to the double game week factor, and Son being Son, just a quality player who hasn't still looked, I suppose, as bad as Salah recently too. In terms of single fixtures, I suppose Isak, from a single game week perspective, is actually the player that is the most interesting within my team as a captaincy option. I probably think that my vice captaincy will go towards either Isak or Jackson. And I kind of like the idea of going for Jackson as my vice captaincy, because I think that the news about Palmer is that he's been in partial training. So I think that there's a huge concern over Palmer's availability over this Aston Villa game. I think that it's more likely he'll make the Tottenham game at home. And I suppose the nice thing about, Palmer being out here is that, of course, I don't own triple Spurs midfield. Some people do. Some people maybe own double Spurs and maybe have some other Chelsea attacking picks. But I think here you have to say that if Palmer misses Aston Villa, he's probably not a captaincy option. Maybe I might be wrong, because Tottenham is actually ultimately also a very poor defense. But I think Isak, if you had to make that decision between Isak and Palmer, I'd probably vice him instead. So for me, it's really between Isak, Jackson, and Son, knowing what I know, knowing that Palmer's probably not going to make the Aston Villa game. But if there is a chance, of course, that Palmer is going to start the Aston Villa game, if we get that confirmed, if we get a leak, for example, Nathan Gissing is someone who's actually a really sort of in the know Chelsea reporter. He usually frequently posts very close to accurate 95, 100% lineups for Chelsea. So if it's the case that, of course, Palmer starts for Aston Villa, I'll probably switch my captaincy towards Palmer then, and this discussion would have been completely moot, and then I vice captain Son. But for now, just taking the assumption that Palmer is not going to make the first game, I do think, as I said, Son's the captaincy option for me. The vice captaincy is between Isak and Jackson, but hopefully he doesn't have to resort to that. And that's it really for this game week. I hope you guys have a wonderful time. I hope you guys had all much better game weeks than myself. Congratulations to all of you free hitters. I've seen some people, for example, like FPL Harry, without a free hit, absolutely smashing it, completely jumping on top of me in rank. So congratulations to him and all the other managers. As I said, take care, guys. I'll see you guys soon, and goodbye.